Greetings students. So in this video, I'll be discussing about the week 5 contents to be discussed. Okay, so let me share the PPT with you. Okay. So we'll be starting with Unit 3 in week 5. So Unit 3 is all about sampling. Okay, very simple concept to accept, but many methods to be studied under this unit. So this is Module 3, sampling, and these are the topics to be covered in week 5. Okay, so I'll be discussing about the meaning of the sampling and when is the sampling appropriate, and what are the various concepts in sampling, what are the steps in sampling process. Okay, so let us begin defining the sampling. So as we all have discussed the research process, steps in research process in unit 1, okay, so the sampling is one of the steps in research process. Okay, so until you have defined your hypothesis, you know what are the variables you have to select, um, uh, right? And once you know who is your population, you have to start identifying. You know you have already identified your research methodology. You would have designed your research design, and you know who is your population. Okay, but it is very difficult for you to cover the entire population and do a survey. For that reason, what you have to do is you have to draw the sample. So that is the main reason for going for sampling process, right? So since we have the identified population, maybe for example, employees. Take for example, employees in an organization. You're studying an organization and you want the employees to participate in your survey. Okay, so might be the organization of thousands of employees in thousands working. Okay, so you cannot do a survey of all those 1,000+ employees. Okay, it will be a tedious process, but what you can do is you can select few sample who will be the true representative of the population as your sample and do the survey. Okay, so it will make your job also easier, and it will be easy to generalize the findings to the rest of the population. That is the reason sampling process is conducted. Okay, so hope you all remember what do you mean by a sample and a population. You would have studied in statistics also. Okay, so sample is a subgroup, a subset of the population which you have identified. Okay, so population is the entire group of elements. As I told you, the employees of an organization is your population. So the entire group of employees will form your population. Okay, but few employees you are selecting it for your study. So those employees become your sample. Okay, and the process through which you select these sample out of population, it is called sampling process. Okay, sample is the elements which you are drawing it. It is a subgroup of the population, but the methods or the techniques which you make use to select these sample from the entire group of element, that is the population, is called sampling process. Okay, sampling. Now let us discuss few concepts which are related to sampling. So as I told you, population. Population in other terms we call it as universe. Okay, and this is represented as capital N. Capital N. Okay, so population, as I told you, it might be employees of an organization, customers of a particular product, students of a particular college, university, or households of a particular city, village, towns, country. All these form your population. Okay, so as I told you, since the population size will be very huge, very tedious process to cover everyone, what you can do is you can draw the sample. Okay, so that is what this unit is all about. Now sample, as I told you, it is nothing but a subset or a subgroup of the population. Population is entire elements under your study which you have identified for your study, but sample is only a group of elements which you are selecting it from the population or universe. So it is represented as small n. Okay, then coming to sampling unit. When you are selecting the sample, before selecting the sample, you will be deciding about sampling unit. Sampling unit is nothing but a geographical one. Okay, if you're classifying the students based on universities, so universities will become your sampling unit. If you are classifying the households based households, then each household will become a sampling unit. Okay, if you're classifying, or sorry, if you're selecting the employees for your study, your organizations will become your sampling unit. If you're covering the city, for example, Bangalore, so the Bangalore will become your sampling unit. Okay, maybe you can classify again it into different areas like north, south, Bangalore, east, west. So these will serve as your sampling unit. Okay, then you have to decide about sampling frame. So now you know who is your population. Now you know how to draw the sample. The next thing is um, you have to select the sampling frame. The other name for sampling frame is list of sources. Okay, from where you get the information or the database about your sample. Okay, you know you have to draw so many samples. You know customers are your, or employees or students are your sample. From where do you get the information or the data about these things? You have to search for a sampling frame. Okay, maybe telephone dictionary directory, or maybe it is RTO, or maybe electoral rolls. Okay, so or maybe if you want to find out the students, you have the list of students who have got admitted to an university or to a college. Okay, so this will serve as your sampling frame. Next is sample size. Okay, as I told you, since your population will be huge, you cannot cover everybody. That is the reason you are drawing sample. But how many to cover? Okay, the size has to be decided. So you have different formulas to calculate the sample size. If at all the population is finite, you know the population number, okay, size, then you have a different formula to calculate, arrive at the sample size. If at all your population is infinite, then you have one more formula to arrive at the sample size. So based on that, you have to calculate the sample size. Okay. Once you know how many to cover, how many to draw, you should decide on the techniques and methods which we are going to discuss in next week, in the next video. Okay. You have to start with the sampling process. That is selecting all these things and drawing the sample. So the process involved is called sampling process. So these are the concept of sampling. Okay. So there is one more term called as census. Okay. So what is the difference between census and sampling? You all are aware of census. Okay, so you'll in the census what you will be doing is you will be covering the entire elements or the units of the population, but in case of sampling you're covering only a subset or a group of elements from the population. Okay, so census is appropriate only when you have the population size as less. Okay, and it is you are able to cover the entire population, then you can go for census. But if at all you have your population size, which is very huge, large, you have to go for sampling. Okay. And when you do have time and cost constraints, you have to go for sampling process only. And if at all you feel like the population is homogeneous, have similar characteristics, you can go for sampling. Okay. Sometimes it is not possible to do the census. Okay. Then you can go for sampling process. No. When you are drawing a sample and when you have drawn a sample, how do you decide that it is a good sample? Okay. So the sample which you are drawing should represent the entire population, should be a true representative. In the sense, all the elements who are in the population should be present in your sample. Okay. Maybe it is homogeneous or maybe it is heterogeneous. Okay. You have to include all the elements which will represent the population. Okay. Then you can call it as a good sample. Then appropriate sample size. This is very, very important because based on the proportion of your population size, maybe it is bigger or it is smaller, it should be of appropriate size. Okay, you cannot say like the population is very high, say for example 10,000 and you cover only 100, it doesn't serve the purpose. You cannot generalize your findings to the rest of the 9,900 people. Okay, so that is the reason you use some formula and calculate the sample size. So if at all you have a more sample size, more accuracy in your results. Okay, and when you're drawing the sample, you have to be very careful, knowledgeable about various techniques and methods available. Okay, so there are different techniques like probability sampling technique, non-probability sampling technique, and in under each of the techniques you have different methods. Okay, so any of the methods can be used. Those are all the standard methods which you can use to draw the sample. So as a researcher, you should have a great knowledge about these sampling techniques and methods. Using those, whichever is suitable for your study, you have to decide and take it for the drawing the sample. Okay, and it should be sample should have a true mix, complete mix. Okay, of the population elements, as I told you in the beginning itself. Okay. Now coming to the sampling design process. So this is a flow chart which says how you have to do the sampling. Okay. So how does it start? It starts with identifying and defining the target population, then determining the sampling frame, then specifying the sampling unit, then selection of sampling methods, then determine the sample size, and finally execute the sampling process. Okay, so first start with defining the target population. Okay, so who are your target population? The elements, the units which you want to study, which you want to include under your study. Those are called as your target population. So as I told you, it might be customers, it might be employees, students, teachers, anybody for that matter will be your target population. Once you have defined it, you have to define the sampling frame. I told you sampling frame is nothing but the list of sources. Okay, so you know customers. So where will you get the information of the database about the customers? You have to identify the right source. Okay, then specify the sampling unit. As I told you, whether it is an organization, it is geographical one, maybe it is a village, town, it is school, college, organization, anything for that matter that serves as your sampling unit. After that, you have to select the methods. So I told you there are two techniques, probability and non-probability. So based on whichever is feasible for the study, sampling method has to be chosen. So once you have chosen this method I'll use, then you have to decide how many to be drawn, the sample size. So as I told you, using the formula, you can calculate the right size of the sample and then start drawing the sample. You know the method, how to draw. Using that method, draw the sample until you get the desired sample size. So this is called sampling design process. Okay. So this is the explanation for each of the steps here. So the first thing what you're going to do is you're going to define the target population. Who is the target in the sense? Those elements or objects which you want to study, involve in your study. Okay. So those are called as target population. And inside the population, you call the population as elements. Okay, those who are participating, those who are the population, they are called as elements. Okay, you have to define the extent also, you have to define the time period also when you are selecting the sample. Okay, right. So extent is to the geographical boundary, to what extent you are covering, what is the scope, and the time factor. Okay, the period for time consideration. Okay, so in this example, for a study on a departmental store, okay, so the elements will be the male or the female head of the household responsible for most of the shopping at the departmental stores. So sampling unit will become your households. Extent is you are covering only Bangalore city, and time period maybe which year you're collecting the I mean selecting the sample, you're doing your research, maybe it is 2011 or anything else. Okay, this is an example. Then determining the sampling frame. As I told you, sampling frame is nothing but the list of sources. Okay, so maybe a telephone directory or anything for that matter, you can use it as a sampling frame. Okay, for example, here you want to learn about the scooter owners in a city. Okay. So how will you get to know the customers of scooter owners? You will get a list of people who have registered their vehicles in RTO. So RTO will serve as your sampling frame. So this RTO will have all the name, addresses, and type of vehicles also which they possess. So this will give you the information about the customer. So this will serve as your sampling frame. Okay. Next, sampling unit. As I told you, it will be the geographical one. So if at all you want to study the retailers, so retailers contacted in the local locality, so they will become your sampling unit. Sampling method. Okay, I told you probability and non-probability sampling techniques. So under probability, the main difference between these two is in probability, everybody, the elements, all the elements in the population are given an equal chance to participate. But in case of non-probability, there is a bias involved because it depends on the judgment or the convenience preference of the researcher. Okay, so under probability, you have again different methods like simple random sampling, then systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling. So these are the four methods which we are going to study. Okay, so in probability, as I told you, you are giving everybody an equal chance. So in simple random technique, what you're going to do is you're going to use either lottery method or you're going to use a random number table method. So in lottery method, what you're doing is, for example, if I want to pick, we have 100, think for example, we have 100 students and I want 40 students out of 100 students. So what I'll do is I'll write the names of all the students in the chit and pick the lottery. Randomly, I'll pick 40 students from 100. So I'm giving everybody an equal chance and I'm picking 40 from that pool. Okay, so those 40 chits will become my sample. Or otherwise, I can even use random number table. So in many of the textbooks, you can find these tables. So based on the table values also, you can decide how you're going to select the sample. Then one more is systematic random sampling. Okay. So in systematic, what you're doing is you have to calculate the difference between each element. Okay. If I select one element, the next element with what difference I'll be selecting. Okay, so for that you have to calculate a value called as k value. Okay, so how do you get k value is you divide the population divided by the sample. You will get the k value. Suppose for example the k is 10. Okay, so from 1 to 10 I have a freedom to select any number as my first element as the sample. Okay, I for example if I select 5 between 1 to 10, 5. Okay, and the k value, since the k value is 10, so 5 fifth element will be my sample 1, 5 plus 10 15 will be my second element, 15 plus 10 again 25 will be my third element, and I keep on going until I get some the desired sample size. This is called systematic. Then we have stratified sampling where we are creating the groups. Okay, strata means group. Groups based on some homogeneous characteristics. Okay, so we'll be creating number of stratum with different characters. Each group will be different from one another, but inside the group, the elements are homogeneous, right? So that is called stratified random sampling. So after you have created the stratum, from the stratum you can just draw the sample by using either simple random or systematic random sampling. Next one is we have cluster sampling. Cluster is again group. Okay, we are creating the clusters. Okay, so one difference between stratified and cluster is stratified, as I told you, it has the homogeneous characteristics inside the stratum. But in case of cluster, we have heterogeneous component inside each cluster. Okay. Coming to non-probability, we have again different methods. So your probability, as I told you, one advantage is the results will be accurate and no bias is involved. you feel like you have a lot of confidence in getting the accurate results. But in non-probability, I'm not giving everybody an equal chance to participate, but based on my convenience, I am selecting the sample. Okay, so again, in this, you have convenience sampling, you have a judgmental sampling, you have snowball sampling, and you have quota sampling. Okay, so convenience sampling is nothing but based on the convenience of the respondent, convenience of the researcher, and availability. Whoever are easily accessible and available, you're going to cover them as your sample. In case of judgmental sampling, I'll based on my judgment, in the sense the researcher's judgment or the preference, purposely I'll be picking some sample or some elements from the population. So that will become judgmental sampling. And if at all I'm creating some quota inside my research, okay, so I'll be reserving some category of people for my study. That will serve as quota sampling. And snowball sampling is like I'll pick one person as my first respondent. I'll get the more responses from that first respondent. One person will give the references of two or three persons. Again, those two or three will be giving another 3 to 4 responses. And it goes on. It's just like a chain link. And you have to continue doing this referrals until you achieve your sample size. So you have to decide the right method to draw the sample. Okay. Next is determining the sample size. So as I told you, sample size has to be larger since you have to get the accurate results. Okay. So it has to be proportionate to the population size. So you have different formulas to calculate the sample size. If the population is finite, you have a different formula. If the population is infinite, you have a different formula. So based on that formula, you will be calculating the sample size. In the sense, numbers, how many you want from the population. Okay. If at all I want 40 students from 100, your 40 will be your sample size, 100 will be your population size. Okay. Then execute the sampling process. So once you know who is your population, how many you want as your sample, from where you're going to get the databases for your sampling unit, okay, you know the numbers also, then you start executing, drawing using some probability or non-probability technique. Okay, so then you will achieve in drawing the sampling. So this is called sampling process. Right. So these are the topics which I am going to cover in week 5. Okay. So hopefully you have understood few things here. So I will be dealing with the a few topics in week 5. That is the sampling, meaning of sampling, the various concepts under sampling, and the steps involved in sampling process. Okay. Happy learning. Thank you.